Hey guys, Professor Matt here with an overview of Chapter 11. This chapter has to do with legal aspects of what we do in public relations. Now, as the chapter says, you're not going to become a legal expert by reading this chapter, but there are a few things we need to know in order to keep ourselves and our organization safe legally when we start to do our PR efforts. So one of the first things we have to realize is this whole idea of free speech, right? The First Amendment guards our free speech. But the law makes a distinction between political speech and commercial speech. So political speech, thoughts, opinions, and so forth of people, right? And we can say what we want to say with there are some exceptions, right? You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that's called clear and present danger, and you can get in trouble for that. But for the most part, hopefully, we have free speech in the United States, and this is a very important thing. In fact, we talked about the idea of public relations helping organizations have a voice in the marketplace of ideas. So free speech is important. But there is political speech, which encompasses all that stuff we sort of talk about with opinions and we have a right to say what we want to say, kind of thing, with commercial speech. Now, commercial speech is what we deal with in public relations, advertising, and marketing, and so forth. You cannot say whatever you want to say with commercial speech, right? There are rules and regulations that guide organizations of what they can and cannot say, right? Because you can't say that a product does something and it doesn't do that. So exaggerated claims or what have you. Okay, so that's really important to know. Organizations are not protected with the First Amendment to say whatever they want to say about a product or a service. Okay, that's really important. Okay, the textbook makes talks about defamation. That's one of the things we need to be concerned about in public relations. There's two forms of that. Slander and libel. Slander refers to spoken communication. Libel refers to written communication. Both of these fall under the umbrella of defamation. Okay, and there's many ways we actually can get in trouble. Either we're going to be in trouble, or we're going to protect our clients from defamation. Now, I want you to read that section on defamation. There's things that have to be in place in order to win a defamation lawsuit. One of the things that differences that the law makes is the difference between a private citizen and a public citizen. If you're a private citizen, you have a much greater chance of winning a defamation lawsuit versus a public figure. So look at that in terms of the various categories and the stipulations for defamation. There's also intellectual property. If you create something, whatever it is, you own that property. If your organization creates something, you want to protect that. And there's copyrights, there's trademarks, there's patents, all designed to protect the thing that you create. And it could be anything that you reproduce, distribute, or whatever it might be, from pictures to text to choreography to sculptures, music, architecture, whatever it might be. All of these things have a copyright component, and we have to be careful of that. Of course, in school, we know about plagiarism. You cannot use someone else's work and claim it as your own. Okay, but the concept of fair use is the way that you get around a lot of this in terms of saying if you use someone else's work, you need to put it in quotes. All right, and that's called fair use. You can take a portion of something and use it. It does get murkier and kind of more complex when we talk about the internet and using things that you pull down off of a site and then use it for your site. The internet has caused all kinds of new laws to be considered. Okay, and that's something that's new, right? The digital age and intellectual property has spawned a whole group of laws and lawyers looking at things in terms of how do you protect. There's the idea of Creative Commons. You've already seen that. You're trying to grab an image or whatever. If it's Creative Commons, maybe you can use it, but there's still issues around that, and you got to be careful. Typically, what happens in PR is that you will have to run stuff past your lawyers. Whatever it's going to be, a public announcement, like a news release. When I worked for the big corporations like McKesson Corporation, National Semiconductor, we would always have the lawyers look at it. It was part of the company's protocol. They had to look at what we were doing to make sure we were covered legally. So there's a section in the chapter about protecting publics, right? We are in the public relations business. We're in the relationship business. We have publics that we deal with. There's a whole host of laws that will protect publics and that make them safer to do business with you, right? In sort of this marketplace of goods and services. So one is of laws, or one category of laws is safety and accuracy. Okay, so that's why if you're in the drug or the pharmaceutical business, you've got that big disclaimer, the scary disclaimers that come at the end of a drug a commercial. Which, by the way, just so you know, globally, we're one of the only nations that actually allows drugs to be like direct-to-consumer marketing, right? A lot of nations say, well, that you can't do that because, consumers need to weed through a lot of stuff to know whether this drug is safe or not. So if you're doing something in drugs or food, then you are beholden to the Food and Drug Administration, right? They're going to be monitoring, and they can assess whether what you're talking about is safe or not. So in food and drugs, animal, veterinary products, cosmetics, all that stuff, the Food and Drug Administration is going to take a look at that. There's also the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, and the FTC's job, they are a watchdog over truth in advertising. So if you make a claim that your product can do something, like I think it was Airborne a number of years ago said it could increase the times, speed up the recovery times from a cold. They had to be careful about that. I think the FDA got in there, or not the FDA did, but the FTC said that you can't make that claim. So a lot of times when you're trying to make product claims, all the time I should say, the FTC is going to be watching to make sure you have not overstated your claims. And that's important. If you have a public company and you're doing your quarterly financial announcements or your annual reports or whatever, you've got another governmental agency that's going to be looking after you, and that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has a host of regulations of how you actually communicate financial information. Or you're doing an IPO, initial public offering. There's a whole host of guidelines to do that. I think it's super exciting to do. I've taken a number of companies from private to public, and it's an exciting thing to do. But you can really mess up an IPO, have it delayed or pulled if you do the communication wrong. Which, by the way, we will get into this in some chapters down the road. But financial public relations is one of the most lucrative areas of PR you can go into because we're dealing with some pretty important high stakes stuff, okay? And the SEC can be someone that can actually make your life miserable if you don't do it right. A couple of other little things here. We talk about public figures have a right to their personas. Like you can't take a celebrity and just use them for one of your advertisements or commercials or whatever, because they own the right to their likeness, and you can't mess around with that, right? You can be sued by them because you can't just randomly do that. By the way, you also can't, and like I say, a company picnic, take pictures of an employee's family and use that in a company newsletter without their permission. Okay, they also own that. So there's a whole host of guidelines that are in Chapter 11, but beyond that, in terms of what do you need to do to make sure you're doing public relations legally, right? Because you don't want to get into hot water. All right, I would encourage you to read Chapter 11, look at the PowerPoint that was uploaded, take the quiz that I've created for Chapter 11, and then also participate in the post and discuss. I'll be back next time with another overview of another chapter.